the tax aspects of buying an aircraft for business use start on the second you take delivery. And where you fly that first flight can have major impacts on sales tax or use tax. If your aircraft can fly above 28,000 feet, it is flying close to airliners, and you are now in a new realm of FAA scrutiny. And this is the first time that a lot of aircraft owners are going to have to deal with an inspector assigned to review their application for special high-level airspace authorizations. But I thought, you know what? You can't go into business. You've either got to be a lawyer or you've got to be paying lawyers. So I thought, if I'm going to be in business, if I'm going to succeed in entrepreneurship, I'm going to have to understand the law. So I chose that instead of an MBA. There was a slight, a pause in private aviation. So maybe 3 to 6 months where transactions were down at that time. But once prices drop and the bottom, when the bargain hunters, I won't call them bottom, bargain hunters come in, aviation transactions explode. I loved studying the law and really enjoyed it and enjoyed studying for the bar. And so I was kind of a little weird in that sense.
It's been said that an ounce of prevention is way more valuable than a pound of correction. My friend John Clark helps aviators with both cases. Sometimes an ounce of prevention can prevent a lot of problems when it comes to compliance and other regulatory issues when you're dealing with the FAA and other government agencies. This is an area that I'm interested in and have virtually no experience in, so I'm really grateful to have John with me so that he can help enlighten us on some things that aircraft owners and operators need to be aware of as that interconnection between their business and their flying meets, and how does that impact the world around them. John, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your business and how you help aviators.
Sure. And Alan, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity to, talk with you on these topics, because they're not something that comes up in everyday conversation. But if you're in the aviation world, if you're moving up through the aviation world, the further you go, the more important this sort of bureaucratic subject matter begins. But so I started out actually out of law school. I didn't really want to practice law. I wanted to be in business. I wanted to be in Silicon Valley. So I started with a small retail startup, worked my way up to chief financial officer, became a general manager in a what was a sort of a military think tank, but it was really focused on aerospace. And so that was a first sort of toe in the aerospace water. From there, I moved through various companies in Silicon Valley doing business development for 15 years, always on the edge of aerospace applications, satellite applications. In the crash, the stock market crash of 2000, when the Silicon Valley was, there were literally tumbleweeds blowing through the streets down there. I went to work for 3M, and they had just started an aerospace division under Jim McNerney, who went on to lead Boeing. But in that got me more into sort of the highly regulated large contracts between sort of the commercial and military aviation. So that gave me a real grounding in terms of business development, marketing. But in 2009, the aviation, market kind of cratered. And so I had helped Christine DeYoung start JetRVSM back in 2006. So I was on sort of a consulting basis from 2006 to 2009. But in the aviation downturn, I stepped over, started to work full time with JetRVSM, and in the process found that there were so many legal issues that I just had to focus on aviation law. So I had been doing business law, privacy, asset protection, sort of side gigs. But I went full bore into aviation and aviation law regulatory compliance starting in 2009.
So, John, I'm curious because the transition from big corporate into a smaller business during a downturn seems like a very poor career decision. Was there any fear with that, or was Christy doing so well that there was no worry about how that might end? Because as I'm thinking about it, like that would be the last time that I would want to make that kind of a transition, but it seems to have worked out for you.
I think it was good because at the time, so when you have those downturns, there's a short pause, and of course, there's always fear when you take on another salary. So I actually started another side company that did corporate organizing out of Wyoming, and so I basically said, okay, I'm going to focus on JetRVSM. I'm going to develop a side gig based on my my ability to practice law as a backstop. But Christie was doing extremely well. There was a slight, a pause in private aviation. So maybe 3 to 6 months where transactions were down at that time. But once prices drop and the bottom, when the bargain hunters, I won't call them bottom feeders, bargain hunters come in, aviation transactions explode. So actually, out of that downturn, JetRVSM's business expanded rapidly
Hmm.
because of when aircraft change hands, that means somebody needs to reset their flight department, uh, reset all of their regulatory compliance, and so you actually have a burst of business even in a major downturn.
Tell me about Christie's background, knowledge, and experience. You said you helped her start Jet RVSM. So tell us a little bit about your partnership, about her experience, and then also what Jet RVSM does. What is the core client and the mission of what you're trying to do?
Sure, and I hope you'll have her on sometime in the future because she's got great stories. I'll just tell this little one, which was she was working for Cessna, now Textron Aviation, but it was Cessna Aircraft Company at the time. She was in their initial RVSM department, so she was on a technical service team for citation jet owners, just as taking new deliveries. And she was in the first team that was writing what are reduced vertical separation minimum manuals, meaning procedures necessary to fly between 28,000 feet and 41,000 feet, where it's compressed airspace. So the aircraft are flying very close together,
Mm.
and it was a new thing back in 2006. So the FAA was requiring everybody to have special procedures and training in order to fly in that group. So she was complaining that that she was starting out and that the engineers in the department were making a lot more money than her. And I said, well, why don't you make a little spreadsheet about how much you've billed on behalf of Cessna? And she came back and it was $600,000 she had billed by herself, which was more than double what any engineer had done. But she was a junior level person, no engineering background. So I said, you should ask for a raise. They gave her a very, very tiny raise. So we were sitting at a Panera in Wichita, Kansas, and I said, time to start a company. I mean, I've been starting companies for 15 years. You need to be in business. So we thought, could she ever get to 4 customers per month? Because that would be where she could support herself. Okay. We get sometimes 15 customers a day now. So that it's come a long way since those early times where she just thought, if I could just convince 4 people to work with me, I'll be set.
I love the foundation story of businesses because it often involves I was sitting in my living room, or in your case, we are sitting in a Panera in
Yeah.
Wichita and having a conversation. And by default, you go to, well, how many people do we have to serve to make this work? Um, and that's always the scariest part, right? Can we really do this? How long did it take to go from, hey, we actually can do 4 people a month to we're succeeding and growing and we don't have to worry about surviving anymore?
I think Christy was quite surprised. She borrowed $5,000 from her parents, and that was our founding capital. She paid that back pretty quickly. and we've never had to borrow any money since. I would say within a year she was fine. She was doing well, because the difference was she was one of those first people to do a one-on-one helping you navigate very difficult FAA new concepts, and she was low pressure, and she was high on information and understanding the process. So I think when we go to events now, especially we got uh, actually Eclipse Aviation was the first OEM that we really uh, built a relationship directly with. I mean, she was competing with Cessna at the time, so the people at Cessna said, she won't last. She won't last 6 months. And then every time she showed up, they'd say, "You're still here? how, how are you surviving against us?" Because the Cessna had their own department. But in any case, now people come up and hug her because people just bought a private jet, single owner, single pilot. She helped them so much that I see her getting hugs from those initial customers when we bump into them at events.
So, John, I have a tangent question. You said that you were going to law school but didn't want to be a lawyer. You wanted to get into business. So I'm really curious about the decision to go to law school, if that's not where you wanted to end up. Or was it while you were in law school, you're like, wow, I really don't actually enjoy this. I'd rather be doing
Oh,
something else.
no. In fact, I loved studying the law and really enjoyed it and enjoyed studying for the bar. And so I was kind of a little weird in that sense. No, the reason I went to law school. It was a specific day that I decided. Well, there were two events that were separated by a couple of years, but first one was a friend of mine and I, actually a friend of mine that you know, that we started a real estate investment limited partnership on the dorm floor in at
Okay.
UC Davis, and our goal for starting this was to have enough money that we could go up to Tahoe and gamble. There's some have fun drinking money or whatever. So we worked with all the people on the dorm floor. The general partner of the investment that we went in on, we were all limited partners, uh, embezzled all the money
Oh my
and
gosh.
split. And one of the investors from the dorm floor, his father was a prominent lawyer in Monterey who had a private plane, and he flew up to Davis, up to Sacramento area, and sued our butts for 2 straight years. and I actually had to go to work in the casino in Tahoe to pay off the judgment. But I thought, you know what? You can't go into business. You've either got to be a lawyer or you've got to be paying lawyers. So I thought, if I'm going to be in business, if I'm going to succeed in entrepreneurship, I'm going to have to understand the law. So I chose that instead of an MBA. I felt like I through a bunch of different things, I felt like I would get my MBA in the trenches, but I can't get a law license in the trenches. Uh, Luckily, though, the way we had done the paperwork, that general partner was eventually convicted, and because we had been diligent in our paperwork, we were in a small group. We got all our money back. It took 7 years of the
Oh,
legal system,
wow.
but we did manage to get all the money back. But by that time, I was out of law school. But by the time that guy was convicted, and he was either going to go to jail or pay us. So anyhow, I was working at a bank right out of college, and the bank was acquired by Wells Fargo. So I knew my job was going to be going away. I was one of those departments, and I was a bank auditor that was going to go away. So that's when I said, okay, enough. I'm applying to law school. So I'd kind of made the decision back in senior year of college, but once there was a sign, time to go to law school.
I love the fact that you were, again, the foundation stories. You started on the floor of your dorm and then had enough salesmanship, I guess, to get enough other people involved that you were able to make an investment. I imagine that there are a lot of lessons that you learned from that experience in um, really how to do due diligence, how to vet who you're investing with. That's not the purpose of where I want to go with this show. Um, but I think a lot of times we can really get down on ourselves when something like that happens. I'm sure it was really stressful when the lawsuit started and you're trying to sort that out. Um,
Right.
but how much value do you think you can attach to that initial experience of forming a business, having something go wrong, and how has that informed, your involvement now with Christie and with Jet RVSM and any other business ventures that you're doing?
Right. So absolutely. And, the next, I did two real estate investment limited partnerships. And in both cases, the general partners stole all of the money. So this was before, before I was 20 years old, this had happened. So those scars were painful. And other than having to work a summer to pay someone back their investment, I learned that there are consequences. I learned that you can't trust people necessarily on their face.
Mhm.
Also, that you might have the right paperwork, but you have to have two. You have to have you have to develop the ability through sort of this experience to learn when the paperwork, the people, and the business scenario makes sense. So that's one of the things I really learned early was to tame the desire to see things the way you want to see them. And because in all these cases, I liked the people I was working with, the investment people I was getting involved with, very personable, right? Paperwork was all in order, but it still didn't work out. So that means there's something else you have to learn with experience and intuition is, does this make sense? If somebody's offering you 18 or 20% return on your money very quickly, right? I mean, I think that those start to look like Ponzi schemes, etc. But I'm grateful that I made those mistakes early. And the other thing, I worked on a lot of startups where you were always dependent on investor money, and if the investor money went away, then you were in big trouble. So when you combine the early lessons of making sure that you have the paperwork, trust, and it makes sense, it's got to make business sense, and then you combine that with not being so dependent on an investor that if they go away, you have to fold up. The third part I learned was that you have to be very careful in your diversifying your customer base and in your marketing, and that came from a different lesson I learned prior to 3M. I was running a small aerospace company. We were making liquid crystal displays, which were going through a Canadian company ultimately to the CIA. This was more than 25 years ago, and all my NDAs are out of the way by now. But we were making displays that could be read without backlight, by
Mm.
moonlight or starlight. So some sort of a clandestine radio. But in there, we had that one big government customer. And I built the company based on that customer would order another, sign a
Mm.
second contract. And they would have, but there was like a 6 or 8 month gap,
Oh
and had a
gosh.
factory full of people with nothing to do. And so I learned that failed because of that. And that was on my shoulders because I had no backup plan. So
Mm.
with Christy from day one, she's very, very conservative, does not like to use debt, likes to doesn't like to get ahead of the expenses, etc. So she's the right kind of person to work with. So I'm exuberant. I want to expand. I want to invest. I want to build the capacity. So it was a good combination. But the main thing is that we were very careful. And if you don't mind, I'd love to just tell one little story that is linked to that after we started the company, where a situation where my experience stopped us from having the same failures that I might have had in the past.
Yeah, I
And
would love to hear that.
yeah, so I was basically the business development sales senior sales executive in Wichita, working with Boeing, Learjet, and um, Eclipse was one of my customers in the western part of the U.S. So I knew all of the distributors that were working with Eclipse, so we worked very hard to build our relationship with Eclipse. And our first office was in their hangar, and Christy had a badge for Eclipse, and so we worked with all their demo pilots, we worked with all their initial customers, preparing RVSM and other FAA paperwork for them. I started hearing from distributors in Wichita that Eclipse wasn't paying their bills and that some of the distributors were on the hook for $1 million. And so we basically went to the chief legal person at Eclipse, and we renegotiated our contract to where we would collect the money from the customer, and then we would pay them their share. So before, Eclipse would collect money from the customer and then pay us for each project that we did. So we swapped that around so that we were collecting the money, and every quarter we would send them the money. Well, when they went bankrupt and all of these people were hung out to dry, we actually owed Eclipse like $20,000,
Mm.
instead of the other way around. So for us at that time, that would have been several months of payroll for us. And so just learning that experience about getting hung up on one customer, also, understanding, is it all making sense, really, paid off. So it saved us to avoid that situation. So you can see where if you can take advantage of the mistakes you make early in your career and, apply them going forward. I really feel like that was one of the pivotal points that saved us a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great lessons in that, John. Number one is it doesn't sound like you were afraid to take action, and nothing happens without taking action. I was visiting with a friend of mine this past weekend who, for the last several years that I've known him, is in this constant evaluating opportunities phase, but isn't taking any action. That's one of the things I said is, there's nothing that I've done, early on. Like you, there were a lot of things that didn't work out the way I expected. But what I gained from that was so much valuable knowledge and information and experience and relationships that now those decisions and that experience really can be of a benefit to me and the people that I'm working with. But without those action steps, if you're just too afraid to try anything or do anything, at some point you're going to have to gain the education, and the education can happen through schooling, like going to law school, or it can happen through experience. And a lot of the most valuable education comes when everything doesn't work out exactly the way it should, and it helps you make decisions in the future. Transitioning a little bit, just you talked in the beginning about as you progress or climb the ladder in the aviation world. I think for every pilot, there's a built-in desire to go higher and go faster as you progress in your aviation career.
Yeah.
But I would love to start out at the ground level for the guy that maybe he's buying his first plane, and maybe the biggest worry is I'm going to get a ramp check, or, you know, um, now I have this plane, and let's say I'm a real estate agent and I want to fly clients with me. Let's start at that level. What are services that you can help that person with? What should they be looking out for? Is it necessary to have an aviation attorney that you can contact, or an aviation CPA? Or is that really reserved for the guys that get into the jet level traffic?
Right. Okay, those are all great questions, and I think I can probably help organize some thinking around that. If you're starting out and it's a single piston under 12,500 pounds maximum certified takeoff weight, so we're talking about your Cirrus SR-22 is probably the most popular that we see. And if it's just personal flying, the only thing I recommend to people is it's a good idea to hire an attorney at the purchase part, especially if there's brokers involved, and this, we're members of the International Aircraft Dealers Association, so we work with a lot of fabulous brokers, and we love it when there's a broker in the deal. That just makes things so much better. Uh, but if you're buying an older aircraft and there's any potential for corrosion or any of those things, a pre-buy and having some professional advising you on your side. So, those don't have to be very expensive. If you're if you're getting that small aircraft and you're going to use it for business, I highly recommend working with an aviation CPA before closing to understand how do you because the tax aspects of buying an aircraft for business use start on the second you take delivery, and where you fly that first flight can have major impacts on sales tax or use tax. Sometimes it's and there's an urge for everybody to say, oh, let me put it in an LLC. All my friends told me put the aircraft in an LLC. That's where the problems start with the FAA, because it raises the bar on compliance things you need to think about. If you go to an aviation attorney, they're going to put it in an LLC for a lot of reasons that do have nothing to do with FAA compliance. So I won't get into right now, but they also do all the other paperwork and structuring necessary. Putting it in an LLC is just the first step. You really need some professional help. And an aviation CPA, if you're going to, and there's a lot of firms that are both tax and law. I mean, they're lawyers who also do tax. So, but that I usually recommend for the higher end jets. But starting off with an aviation CPA for business use is a great idea. Now, once you get into the higher performance aircraft, turboprop, very light jet and above, that's where you really do need to have an expert on your side who's maintenance oriented. So, part of the pre-buy, not just the pre-buy report, but it really helps to have a sort of a maintenance related consultant who's going to go out and check out that plane, who's going to interpret the pre-buy report, etc. But then the same applies as the deal gets more complicated. When the value of the aircraft is over $1 million, you might just want to have somebody read over that agreement for you and make sure that basically what happens. They're all compromises, but when you're going through an aviation transaction, there's compromises, and so as a lawyer, the idea is not to kill the deal. The idea is to inform the client. Are you getting what you paid for? What about this term? Have you looked at the assignment of any engine programs? There's 100 little details, insurance, and all of those things that really can be that an attorney is used to looking at in every single transaction, and can just ask you, what are you thinking on this? How'd you like to approach this? One of the things that I've done working with a lot of, let's say, fractional buyers is they think they're getting something in a fractional program, but the agreement, so let's say they're going to take 1/8 of a jet. Now they find out the agreement doesn't really match what they thought their deal was. So, that's where you need some of that feedback. And it goes without saying, if you're going to operate a jet in the name of a company, so if you've got Acme Construction Company, it's going to form a subsidiary, put the jet in the subsidiary, then use it to fly company executives on business and personal. That's where you really need to combine tax and law, and it will save you so much headache, because I think a lot of people feel like they can give their CPA this stuff at the end of the year. But the problem is you've hamstrung that tax professional, because you can't go back to the date of closing and change where you flew it, where you gassed up, who was on board the first flight. All of those are very important factors. It all has to be ironed out before the ink dries on the deal.
John, I have some personal experience, not with an aviation problem, but this is where I learned the value of having an attorney involved in transactions. It was my very first business, and it went well, fortunately, and then we sold it. And it was a friend of the family that was buying the business. And so we didn't think it would be necessary to have an attorney involved. And we sold the business and went along my merry way. Well, about 5 years later, I received notification from the landlords of one of the locations that we owed them back rent. And I thought, well, I sold that business 5 years ago. And so sat down with this gentleman who's a prominent commercial real estate owner and landlord in Arizona. And he was very kind. And I said, hey, here's our situation. We sold this. And he goes, well, that's great, but you never removed your name from the lease. And the lease never was put into the name of the buyer. And they've defaulted, which means you've defaulted, and you now owe me $100,000. And there was nothing we could do. That's what we
Wow.
had to do.
Yeah.
Was I was on the hook for $100,000, and that was the cost of my education and having an attorney involved, even in a transaction where you think you're dealing with somebody that is a friend of the family, or just like in
Right.
your case, I
Right.
like the
These are the
person.
technicalities, the little
Yeah,
technicalities that have nothing to do with your relationship.
right. And so now going forward, as we do agreements and business operations, there's always an attorney looking over our shoulder to make sure that we don't miss something that we just don't know to look for. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about in these aviation transactions. Even some of the things you said about engine programs and things like that wouldn't be something that would have come to my mind. And so
Right.
just the fact that you've been through hundreds or probably thousands of transactions at this point is such a valuable resource for anyone looking to buy a very costly investment, right, in an
Right.
aircraft.
And we know just from, well, JetRVSM, we've had over, well, we know by looking at our invoice numbers, we're over 6,000 transactions now. And when you consider the aviation industry, how many jets change hands in a year? So we're probably seeing about a third of all transactions that are small flight departments, uh, not the airlines, not the big Fortune 500 corporate departments in most cases, but we're seeing thousands of transactions that are more business buying their first or second aircraft. And yeah, you might. I mean, the problem is, you might have to budget a $10,000 retainer in a transaction, but I can tell you, it's always in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential savings when I see, the what could have happened, and unfortunately we've had some deals fall through. But since Christine and I are product service members of the International Aircraft Dealers Association, we are working with hundreds of brokers personally. We know them. And then we know all the lawyers. We know all the insurance people. A lot of times someone comes to me and say, I don't have a lawyer. And I say, oh, here's a guy. You're in Atlanta. Here's a great attorney in Atlanta that I know and trust, but he's going to represent you zealously. We're going to go at it on that agreement. We're going to hammer it out. But I also trust that neither of us wants to kill the deal. We want to find the deal in there so that the customer doesn't regret, somebody doesn't regret the sale and somebody doesn't regret the purchase. And like you said, that's really the ultimate benefit.
John, give me a worst case that you've seen. Well, somebody that didn't work with you that maybe afterwards came and said, I wish we had done this. And what were the circumstances and the outcome of them deciding not to have some representation in this type of transaction?
I would say, I don't. The ones I've seen are the ones who hired me but did not take the advice.
Okay,
So,
so we
so
can do that too.
yeah, because when once they go on their way, I don't always know what happened. Um, one of the ones, let's see, I'll just try to do it very generally. Was they wanted to join a fractional program. I've had this come up most of the time with fractional programs, but In this case, there's a well-known failure of the company Jetit. I don't know if you're familiar with. This was a group that was trying to uh, put together a bunch of Honda jets, and they wanted to sell fractional interest. But the key thing was that you could fly the jet. That
Mm.
was the promise, that you could fly the jet uh, as well. So you could be a so let's say you've got your single engine turboprop, but you'd love to have some jet time. So you could buy into that and have access to a Honda jet, which would be fantastic. And I think the buy-in was it's around $500,000 for all of these. This is all public knowledge. Um, and the issue was that one, they didn't ever get their fractional certificate. So my first point on here was that they're selling a fractional program, but they don't have fractional approval. And there's a difference between, a fractional certificate means that an aircraft manager, who's called the program manager, can handle all the FAA compliance, can handle all of the crewing, maintenance management, and the people who buy in and buy a fraction, which is usually around an eighth of the aircraft, they're still the operator. They're still compliant under Part 91. So it's a very special niche, which allows you to have professional management, professional crewing, but doesn't move you into the charter world, which is much more regulated.
Yeah.
Um, but in this case, it was actually a 135. So I feel that without a lawyer getting involved, you wouldn't realize. Also, one, I knew everybody who was on the founding. I mean, I knew all the people that were involved in JetIt, and I have lots of people I could call to say, hey, what's your experience with these people? So I can do more than just what's on the paper. But then I can say to a client, the fact of the matter is they're actually operating under a Part 135 certificate that they purchased because the
Mm.
FAA would not provide them approval for this fractional program. And under Part 135, you cannot fly the jet. So you're buying a promise in the future that you might get to fly the jet. But in the beginning, it's just going to be a charter. You're just chartering a Honda jet. Um, and so the other issue there in a lot of these is that the fractional will say, well, when the aircraft isn't being used by you, we can charter it out publicly, and we have unlimited hours. So they could be flying a Honda Jet 800 hours a year, which is diminishing the value of the airplane.
Right.
So when you're making your resale or residual value calculation, and when you're putting money into this thing, you've got to realize that this aircraft is going to be a heavily used aircraft, whether you're flying it or not. Um, so in this case, all of the people that invested in the fractionals and JetUp, most of them got their keys to the aircraft handed back to them, and now they're in a partnership on a Honda Jet with no manager,
Oh
no
boy.
compliance paperwork, often deferred maintenance issues, sitting in a hangar. So, and that's a case where I would have told a customer, I think this is too risky. But, the draw of flying your own jet can be
That can
very,
be appealing. Yeah.
right. But at least somebody knew what their risk was, So in that sense, that they accepted the risk, but went ahead uh, anyway. But, so that's probably $500,000 there, that for maybe a fee of maybe $2,500 for me to go through that.
Yeah. What a headache that you saved there, because I think you can add a couple of zeros to the end of that and end up at what that might have cost somebody otherwise.
Oh, right, yeah, and obviously, definitely. I'll tell you one of the ones that I notice is people buy, they want to move up to a higher performance aircraft, a lot more expensive, so they want to share it. They say, "Oh, I've got a buddy who can, who'll buy some time, or here's another pilot that will go in with me." And I'll always say that's great. I always ask, the first question I ask is, okay, you have an insurance policy. One of the pilots lands long, goes off the end, bends the landing gear. the event is covered by insurance. Okay, but now the market value of the aircraft is down 20%. Who's liable for that?
Yeah.
And that, so what happened is the registered owner is stuck with that unless you account for that. So that's always the opening one, because I know that when people are thinking about sharing their aircraft, they don't think about diminution of value in the event of a covered repair that was an insurance claim, but it was caused by the other person. So you have to be willing to accept the risk that if other people are using your plane, your market value may not be what you expected when you go to
Yeah.
sell that airplane.
Really great advice. John, in quick summary, because unfortunately we have to wrap things up on this conversation. Um, what are, if somebody is looking into an aircraft, how do they contact you? Where do they find you? And what are, maybe give me some bullet point services that they should be coming to you for? And then on the final question to that would be, is what are some of the real benefits that you see for these people owning this type of an aircraft, and why would a business owner benefit from having a personal aircraft?
Okay, so yeah, it's a good idea, because my day job is as chief counsel for JetRVSM services, and for that I'm not involved in assisting people. If somebody hires me as a lawyer through my law practice, that's different, and that's where more of the stories are. But the boring part, but that is extremely important, is when you buy the aircraft. If your aircraft can fly above 28,000 feet, it is flying close to airliners, and you are now in a new realm of FAA scrutiny. And this is the first time that a lot of aircraft owners are going to have to deal with an inspector assigned to review their application for special high level airspace authorizations. So if you want to fly outside the country above 28,000, between 28,000 and 41,000 feet, you need a written letter of authorization from the FAA. If you want to fly in terminal area, if you want to fly in the terminal area of the UK, UK and any of the EASA, basically European Union countries, you want to use it, you want to make a GPS landing, you have to have a written authorization for what is LNAV, VNAV, or LPV approaches. If you want to fly RNAV 1 approach to an airport, like a standard terminal arrival routing, you need a written authorization for that. You don't need that inside the U.S. Uh,
Mhm.
so we focus on international operations, but I recommend anybody buying a high performance aircraft, single or twin turboprop, or single or twin turbojet, any of those, they should be calling us before the ink dries on the agreement, because there's a lot of pieces that have to be in place. And so uh, you you have your ownership structure, which when you buy the aircraft, but people don't realize when you have these higher performance aircraft, you need an operating structure which is acceptable to FAA flight standards. And FAA flight standards is a different kingdom than the FAA registry in Oklahoma City. That's like two different bureaucracies. And so one is about security interest and who owns the airplane. The other one is about who's flying it, who's responsible for the aircraft. And one of the number one problem we have coming in the door at JetRVSM is that the structure is not compliant for letters of
Mhm.
authorization. So we help people through that. And if they need a referral to an aviation CPA or an attorney, we can help them with that. But prerequisite Part 91 operational compliance is far less. I'd say 20% or less of clients coming in the door are compliant. And so we
Oh,
can
wow.
really help them get that straightened out. And getting caught in a ramp check is fairly rare, but it's a real headache. It can make your life very miserable for a long time. So that's why it's you have to, if you want to roll the dice and ask for forgiveness later, just like in your experience, asking for forgiveness later can be very expensive. So you just decide, do you want to spend a little money up front and get it all right? or would you rather roll the dice and see if you ever have any sort of interactions with the FAA? Um, so we help with all whole range of international ops compliance, and I won't list everything, but basically, if you're starting a new flight department of a high performance airplane capable of flying outside the U.S., that's a good time to call somebody like us or one of our competitors that understands FAA compliance and FAA letters of authorization. Now, as far as remind me on the second question was about using an
What?
aircraft in business.
Yeah. What are some of the reasons why someone should consider an aircraft for their business, and what are some of the benefits that you've seen come to those businesses through aircraft ownership?
I think that the number one reason for buying an aircraft for business is to get there before your competitor does. How can you get to where your customer is faster and more often? And if you look at somebody like Walmart and their fleet, they don't want their managers spending nights in hotels on the road. They put a lot of money into making sure that managers get to meetings and get home. And so that's one of the number one is the speed and access to business that you can do. Now, there are tax advantages. So for a lot of companies, if there's liquidity, if they have a lot of excess liquidity profit at the end of the year, that's why you see most transaction close in the fourth quarter, because there are significant tax benefits to that. And if you use an aviation CPA to structure it, they can maximize those tax benefits so that if you start small with something that's useful for your business, and then you can grow if your business grows with the airplane, then you can keep moving up. There's a real good tax structure. But if you just go for the Gulf Stream right off the bat, I don't recommend that. Work with a good broker who understands your mission, can get you into a plane that is suitable for your type of business, which generally must be interstate. If all your business is inside of California, that's going to be more expensive. Uh, just in general, you want to be flying that aircraft in interstate commerce, and having to do business across different states. That's where sort of the starting point. But start with the right sized aircraft, work with a legitimate broker, hire an attorney, and then you'll have a long history moving up through the aviation world, helping your business grow. Lots of people have done it.
Sage advice there, John. How do people contact you if they want to find you?
If you want to contact JetRVSM and just can help you get to Christy or to me, that is 877-538-7876, which is 877 JetRVSM on your phone. And just you can tell the person who answers the phone where you heard about us and then that you'd like to get some questions answered. You can always reach us at customer service at jetrvsm.com. You can go to our website at jetrvsm.com. We have if you wanted to go through a pre-quote questionnaire and tell us a little bit about your transaction, that goes straight to me. So if you fill out a pre-quote questionnaire with the sort of the deal structure, that gives you a free chance to have a lawyer look at your transaction and say, hey, that's clean, or that's got some problems. Maybe we need to refer you to somebody. So those are the best ways to contact us.
That's awesome. John, thank you so much for your time today and for joining me on the show. We're going to need to have another follow-up conversation because I feel like there are so many other areas that we can dive into that would be of value to our aviation listeners.
Yes, there's a lot to learn. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience.
Thanks, John.